Don't talk to me, I don't believe a word. Don't try to make me feel alright.
Yeah.
All right, we're
Hey,
going.
how's it going, you guys?
Going all right.
Cilantro.
All right. Yeah. Rock and roll. So this is another episode of American Reckoning, our podcast. And I've got Todd there with us and Aaron, and I'm Paul. So welcome. We've got a pretty cool topic. There's a lot of assumptions going out there back in 1861 and 65, and then even to today about Southerners and the Confederates being a bunch of traitors and treasonous. It's justified the big war and the narrative that you see. And we think that's a whole bunch of crap. And so this is a little bit of a fiery point of contention for us in our side of things, and for all Americans for that matter. They should pay close attention to this type of information that they're going to get, because they're not going to get it out there, in the institutions and the public and the media. So, freedom and independence is really the notion where people rule themselves versus a central authority to rule over you. That's what this is all about. And that's what the Southerners were fighting for. So just think about that for a second. Freedom and independence, the notion that people rule themselves versus a central authority ruling over you. And it's just as relevant in 1776, 1861, and today. And I personally believe, and I know everybody, a lot of friends and relatives and you guys, we all believe that we're still free and independent to some degree, but we've lost it. We've lost a lot of it. And that's why we say American Reckoning, because American Reckoning is about today and looking at the past and how that's played out, particularly when we talk about our Southern heritage and our Confederate ancestors and just American independence, period, which our grandfathers were heavily involved in, and which we all know to be self-evident. So, free nations are getting born all the time around the world. So why not in America? If you think you're free, that is, the United States as a nation is free, you're mistaken. So we're losing that, or we've lost it. And so you need to pay attention to something like this podcast. The South seceded or attempted to, and they were overwhelmed by a central authority and the army of Lincoln. And, why was this? We need to look at some of these questions because they are pertinent today. And who came up with the fact that the victors and radicals decided it was treason to do so, that is to secede and try to form our own government, because the one that we saw was corrupt and was no longer limited. It was out of control. And we'll look at a question, was it really a rebellion? And a rebellion of what? We'll look at that question. The answer that we know is no, it wasn't a rebellion. We last spoke on secession, so we'll talk a little bit about that, because that's a huge thing when we're talking about treason and what people think today. And they're based on assumptions, like I'm gonna go ahead and roll something here, and
And I might add, it's not what most you hippies think it is.
Yeah,
the government wants people to be complacent and non-caring, and that's why they're legalizing everything except tobacco. Of course, that's evil.
Yeah.
So when you see this, that's a big assumption. That's a big fat doobie, and that's a joint, and that's marijuana in there. There's nothing in there. Okay. Just like when you have an assumption about that flag, or you have an assumption about treason and traitors. Well, your assumptions can be wrong, because what you see what you see and you assume is not necessarily the truth. This is a little peanuts paper that I use for groceries. So, I mean, that's what we're trying to explain with this podcast is you have to dig deeper or at least listen. And believe me, everything we do on this show, you can check where we are primary sourcing it. And you don't have to agree all the time. And that's fine. Free country, right? So before we begin, think about these things and what way does the U.S. think about it? Are we really free to, I mean, what is the U.S. government? Does the U.S. government own us? You know, our cars, our property, our land, our houses, our phones.
Practically anymore. Yeah.
Through
Everything.
taxes, through
taxes.
through the taxes they claim
We
right
seem
to our
to be
labor.
renting everything or leasing everything anymore.
Do we
Wasn't
have any
that-
more say in these decisions?
We don't seem to.
Not effectively.
Well, the South and the states, the southern states in 1861, they seceded over far less than what we're putting up with today, if you really think about it. And some people have grown into this and they've accepted it. They've, you know, their assumptions, their acceptance is no longer really thought about much. And but it won't take long. I mean, fast before those freedoms completely go away. And believe me, it is possible. So anyway, so we're going to talk about traitor, you know, the South, the Southerners and Southern people and our whole culture disappearing because why not? When you're called slave owners, when you're called traitors, when you're called, your leaders are called treasonous. But we want to look at what is the basis for that. So we've got we want to start off with, I don't know, Aaron, if you want to go through like a definition of treason, or how do you think?
Well, we can
approach it.
It gets kind of long because there are a couple words within the definition that then you'd have to define further. But yeah, definition of the word traitor is according to dictionary.com for what it's worth. A person who betrays another, a cause, or any trust. Another definition is a person who commits treason by betraying his or her country. That's actually in the definition there. So what's betrayal? You know, definitions of betrayal: the act of exposing or delivering someone to an enemy through treachery or disloyalty, the act of disappointing a person's trust, hopes, or expectations, the act of revealing information in violation of confidence, failure to keep honor, a promise, principle, cherished memory, etc. Anyway, they kind of go on along those lines. And definitions of treason, obviously going to be very similar to traitor since they're related. The offense of acting to overthrow one's government, to harm or kill its sovereign. And that's a very interesting one. Because the offense of acting to overthrow, that's on that definition, the South were not treasonous because they weren't trying to overthrow anybody. A lot of people assume that because Lee ventured into Maryland, Pennsylvania on 2 occasions, that the object was to invade and take over the North. This was clearly not the case. This is on record when they were planning those campaigns as not being the case. They had reasons for going up there, and most of those reasons, I'm sure Todd can attest to this, is to get the Union Army out of Virginia because they knew they'd follow them up there. They would have had to, and they did. But yes, the southern states, the Confederate government was not acting to overthrow the Union government. They were fighting on the basis of separation, same as during the Revolutionary War period. They weren't trying to overthrow the crown. They were fighting on the basis of separation there as well. So there's
that was the first time we sort of try to secede. We seceded as colonies and British subjects from a tyrannical government. monarchy.
I'm
But
going to add, with those definitions, we have to be, as Southerners these days, we have to be careful where we get these definitions from.
Right.
Because if you don't go back to a classic dictionary,
Right.
10, 20 years ago, probably even longer.
Yeah. They add
Right.
a lot. They've added a lot over the years.
The left has been redefining definitions as quick as they can.
Yeah.
And you see,
they call it reimagining. They
Yeah,
reimagining the
reimagining
words, language.
revision, I'll call it.
Yeah.
And you see it in our school books, in what they're teaching our children. So we have to be careful in not using the modern perceptions or what you've read in modern books or dictionaries, but what the people then said
Right.
Mhm.
in the era before it was redefined.
Yeah, and redefining and changing the language or transforming the language or reimagining. These are all words of Marxist, stinky horse dung is really what it is. It's a bunch of crap. And they're good at it. They're really good at transforming America and redefining and reimagining.
Yeah.
They love the crap out of that because they can't stand this country. They can't stand its origins. They can't stand the free people. Look, this is what this idiot, this guy in the Pentagon, this big shot General Mark Milley, this is what he said, and this is from the New York Times, but it's his direct quote. When it comes to Confederates being treasonous, and we're talking about removing specifically recently the names of Robert E. Lee from West Point and all of the base name changes of names from Confederates, which was all fine up until real recently. But he said this, General Milley, the Confederacy, the American Civil War was fought and it was an act of rebellion, he said. It was an act of treason at the time against the Union, against the Stars and Stripes, against the U.S. Constitution. Those officers turned their back on their oath. So this is how this is the head of the, I don't know what Milley is, not the Joint Chiefs, but the head of the Army, whatever. This is what they think of Americans. This is what they think of Confederates, and they want to pigeonhole it into rebellion, and then they want to codify it. They want this to be the law of the land.
Well, clearly he doesn't know his history.
Right. I was about to say. He's
Furthermore, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he doesn't know what a man or a woman is or how many genders there are. Take it easy there, Paul.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Well, and I wouldn't
who
trust
can take him serious?
I wouldn't trust his
He's a
opinion. He's
clown.
not a historian, and seriously, he is a modern.
He's a political craphead.
He is a modern high-level manager within the military. His opinion on history is no more valid than a guy who trades stocks on Wall Street. All right, seriously, this guy has spent. And do you think that he would have gotten very far if he didn't toe a line like that? A lot of these people were good students in school, and they repeated the history that they were taught because that history had to be taught. In order for the state to continue to maintain.
Well,
right.
This whole mindset, not only the bases and West Point, but now they're trying to remove the memorial in Arlington Cemetery to Confederates buried there.
Right. How long before they start digging up the bodies?
Well, they've already started that, we know, but maybe they'll do that in Arlington as well. But that's a memorial that was put together by Jewish former soldiers, former Confederate. Yeah. But that's okay, right? It's not anti-Semitic that you're taking down his memorial or his artwork. And what kind of ghouls dig up people's graves and remove mention of them from a cemetery?
Yeah, well, it's
foolish.
Yeah, it's not only foolish.
Milley isn't even preparing us for war, which we're on the verge of. They're trying to get us into. He's more worried about pronouns. He's going to get a lot of people killed because he's so incompetent.
Yeah, and maybe that's because this is such a stark shift, and he knows better. He knows better. He's not a complete idiot. They know what's going on. They want this division. There's something more sinister going on. That's how.
Well, yes, absolutely. But if you go along with evil, then you're complicit in evil. I mean,
Right.
all it takes for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I do think it's possible that they could be that ignorant. There are a number of specialists anywhere in the world who, they're good at whatever it is that they're good at, but really they're not, they're not specialists on everything. They're only specialists in their field. And so these things come along and they're happy to accept the status quo, and especially to do whatever it takes to get it out of their way, just like politicians. I do definitely think you can have accomplished leaders who are very ignorant and really don't care about these issues the same way a politician would be. They still have the things that are more important to them, just like a politician would have. And maybe it's maybe for him it's trying to figure out how many different genders there are. Who knows?
Yeah.
But something like that.
Yeah, it's all evil. I don't know. It's
getting
hard to
goofy.
explain. It's really hard to explain. And like the famous the movie the actor said in the movie, evil is as evil does. No, I'm kidding. So let's move on. Let's move on to talking a little bit more about Confederates being tried as treason, and and how that examples of that, which are basically so few. You would think that if they're treasonous, if they're traitors, that they would be tried for this, right? But this was not the case. This was not the case at all. There's a lot of complicated stuff coming out of the war between the states, and so one of the things that happened, as for other Confederates who might have been considered for treason, there's a couple facts here that people need to know, and it was, I think, Christmas Day, President Andrew Johnson, in 1868. He said this. He extended, this was part of reconciliation, and he said that he's extending to the Confederates unconditional and without reservation a full pardon and amnesty for the offense of treason against the United States, or of adhering to their enemies during the late Civil War, with restoration of all rights, privileges, and immunities under the Constitution and the laws. So here's a president completely pardoning anything to make it crystal clear, to get to already start changing the rhetoric. And as far as Andrew Johnson's concerned, who was a complete suspect, kind of not a great guy either, but at least he does bring this into play. So that ended any possibility of trying Confederates for treason. Then that was in 1868.
Yeah.
So 3 years after the war.
Right.
3 years after the war. And, the Supreme Court, there was a couple cases, and we'll talk about Salmon P. Chase here in a minute. And one of you guys can read that 1867 quote, because that's an important one. But just before that, in 1866, there was in this case, the Supreme Court said, ex parte Garland, a pardon reaches both the punishment prescribed for the offense and the guilt of the offender. And when the pardon is full, it releases the punishment and blots out of existence the guilt, so that in the eye of the law, the offender is as innocent as if he had never committed the offense. And this is where the deep state and the bureaucracy, the fourth arm of government, starts to insert itself, which was never intended and has gotten out of control. But this is what the Department of Justice said on that. Granted, the Supreme Court and the justices have too much power to begin with, because they're arbiters of so much justice in this country. But at the same time, they have to feel they have to chime in. And this is what they say. We do not interpret this portion, speaking of that 1866 decision of Ex parte Garland, to mean that the pardon creates the fiction that the conduct never took place. Rather, a pardon represents the executive's determination that the offender should not be penalized or punished for the offense. Well, that's like, oh, duh. So it's just, I mean, you see, this is even you see this changing of language, changing of rules by a bureaucracy. Who the hell gave them the authority to proclaim what justice is? They're nothing but a bunch of bureaucrats sitting in a law office in DC in some justice department, unelected, unaccountable to the people. Who the hell are they? But anyway, so moving on to the Salmon P. Chase in 1867. So we follow this a little bit chronologically. So what was that quote? I don't know if one of you guys have it, Todd, or
Todd, I think has it.
This quote is
Is that from 67 or is that?
Yeah, this is 1860, July 1867. This is in Shelby Foote's book, The Civil War, Volume 3, page 765. Quote from Salmon Chase. If you bring these Confederate leaders to trial, it will condemn the North. For by the Constitution, secession is not rebellion. Lincoln wanted Davis to escape, and he was right. His capture was a mistake. His trial will be a greater one. That's
right.
Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase in July of 67.
Who was in Lincoln's cabinet and Lincoln appointed into the Supreme Court.
Right. And remember, Jefferson Davis was imprisoned for 2 years. So how's that for a speedy trial under the Constitution?
Mm-hmm. They didn't know what to do with him.
They were delaying. He was being denied his constitutional rights. He wanted to go to trial because he wanted to prove, let's be honest, he wanted to prove that the Lincoln administration, that the government was completely wrong on secession. And they did not. So what happened? On a technicality, Salmon P. Chase, and in his opinion, he dropped the case. He dropped the case, just what Todd read, because had they gone to trial, Jefferson Davis would have likely won in secession, but they wanted to keep the narrative that secession.
Yeah.
And that set up the 1869 decision 2 years later, because Salmon P. Chase was a Lincoln man. And yes, it was a close one because there was other justices on the Supreme Court that totally disagreed. I think it was a 5-4 decision, Texas versus White, 1869. And this is the change. This is the language that changed when the court held this in that case. And this was about believe it or not, it's the same issue, but Texas versus White. It had to do with U.S. bonds that were seized and sold by the Confederate state of Texas, but they were payable to Texas after the war was over. And Chase first presented the traditional Lincoln theory on secession, that secession did not destroy the state of Texas, but he changed his tune. So this is what he ruled. He ruled that the secession was legally impossible. Nevertheless, the process of Reconstruction was still Constitution. So he's also defending Reconstruction. Grounded as it was in Congress's power to ensure each state a Republican government and recognize a legitimate government in any state. Chase's opinion reaffirmed the permanence of the Union and its states and the duty of the states to the rights and obligations of all citizens. The Constitution and all its provisions looks to an indestructible union composed of indestructible states. An indestructible union composed of indestructible states. So he is reaffirming this perpetual union concept. and that it's indissoluble. It cannot be broken up. It's more perfect because we're all in this more perfect union. And this basically said secession was unconstitutional.
Well, he's overruling the Constitution and the 10th Amendment.
Correct. He decides in his ruling and the majority that we're just going to overturn the Constitution because he has absolutely, and this is upholding what the radical Republicans, what the Lincoln Republicans and of now, if even both parties started to go in that direction. So he basically, he was, Lincoln appointee, and he basically changed the ball game and permanently set us in motion. But we all know the original Constitution. And, we know that is wrong. We know that decision is wrong. We know that is a complete overreach. So,
well, he's basically saying these states, any state that considers himself a sovereign entity unto itself, is no more. And I've heard other historians refer to, the loose bond between states that created the United States, these United States. And I've heard them say in 68 or 69 that it stops there and becomes the United States. No longer these states, it's the United States.
Yeah. In fact, it wasn't the only word in that I think was capitalized, like in the Treaty of Paris before then, was America, as a proper noun. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's many examples where we see the corruption that's going on, right? And it's important to know the origins and what really happened and what is to identify corruption. And this is a movement where the states and the people no longer have the authority. What he's talking about is we, the federal government, now have the authority. You states are subservient. You are sub us. We now are in control of you. That is the message. And that is not America. That is not how we were supposed to be.
Right. That's not the founding.
But then if you think I'm smoking something, go take a look around you. Look at our nation. Our states our representatives have no say in anything.
Right.
So there's a couple of points here. Go ahead if you wanted to.
No, I was just going to mention what the 10th Amendment says.
Yeah.
The Constitution limits the federal government specifically to these granted powers. All others are reserved for the state.
Right.
He essentially, without repealing the 10th Amendment, says we're just going to ignore that, and it's not that anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on that basis, the supremacy clause and the necessary and proper clause should be limited by the 10th Amendment whenever they come into conflict. But no one ever stood up for the 10th Amendment because, keep in mind that up until the 17th Amendment, which was well after the so-called Civil War, senators were appointed, and you'd think they would have had. In fact, there was one instance, I can't remember specifically. I remember where states recalled, I think it might have been 7 different states. Oh, I'm gonna have to look it up, but recalled their senators because they started operating in a way that the state didn't like, and they're supposed to be able to do that. But now they can't really because senators are popularly elected.
Right. Yeah, they could recall their delegates. Yeah, I mean, and there's speaking of recalling or delegates. I mean, we can go back and look at some of the original this is from the Declaration of Independence, but delegates approved the Declaration, but they did so as sovereign colonies. So this is from the very beginning. So when they declared independence from Great Britain, and we have to start kind of from the beginning. Each state, they could bring as many delegates as they wanted, but only one vote per colony. Okay. There were 13 colonies. Every single one of them voted in favor of the Declaration of Independence. Treaty of Paris, 1783. You're talking about where Great Britain actually names, and we've talked about this before in some of the other podcasts, they actually name for the first time the word states. Independent. They name each of the independent states in the Treaty of Paris. They no longer even use the term colonies. And I think you mentioned something about the term national government in the Constitutional Convention, Aaron, where you said that there was a bunch of times where they actually rejected the use of
when they were during the Constitutional
Convention.
When they came together to you had Alexander Hamilton and guys like him got voted down in a big way, but they were pushing for perpetual union, but more so for a centralized big government. And that didn't fly. I mean, they were not popular, and they were outvoted, a lot. I mean, by a large margin. I mean, it wasn't even close. So yeah, these ideas. Not only that, I've mentioned this before. They were replacing the Articles of Confederation, and some things in the Constitution closely echo things in the Articles of Confederation. One of the things that was removed was the specific language for perpetual union. They could say it was implied or something like that by something else. People do argue that. But the truth is there was specific language that they did not choose to carry over, into this new thing that was going to be superseding the Articles of Confederation. But yes, the arguments for consolidation were made. They were like just very soundly rejected by everyone. And so, I mean, it's very clear that the intent of the convention was not for consolidation. There were a few people and widespread, a good cadre of people who did want this, which is, the Hamilton types, later on Henry Clay, later on Lincoln, who were centralists. They liked the British model. They liked the mercantilism. They wanted to copy the strongest, and that's not an unfair argument, but everyone saw the problem with that.
Yeah, it can turn into a crap show, which is what it has. I mean, they weren't stupid even back then. They knew, oh, wait a minute, we're not going to be given over all our powers over to this entity that it hasn't even really been created, and you're creating another possibly a tyrannical situation, irrespective of the states and their delegates and the voices of the people through that representative way.
They didn't go through that war just to stop paying taxes to Westminster and to start doing it in Philadelphia or later on DC.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, you can only imagine how their discussions about that very thing went, if it wasn't a direct quote. Yeah, I mean, so we, from the very beginning, in the podcast here, you're talking about changing language and all this stuff, reimagining. Well, it even happened. I know Todd just loves the Pledge of Allegiance sometimes because it talks about one nation indivisible, and that's a load of crap.
Well, and people don't realize the Pledge of Allegiance came in after the war for that very reason, because they had to get everyone, and it has been ruled in court that even if you didn't know what you were doing and you recited that as a school child, you have all, so I mean, technically that's fraud. There's a couple different types of fraud in contracts. But yeah, you can't say, oh, when you were a kid, you said this every day because we told you to, and now now you have to stand by it as a self-aware, emancipated adult. I mean, that's absolutely absurd, but it has been held in in U.S. courts that is the case.
I have no problem with the pledge, except I leave out the part about indivisible because it's simply not true.
Well, and it's been changed a lot over the years too. They added under God in the 50s because of communism.
Yeah.
And I forget some of the other additions, but it has been, kind of monkeyed with.
I mean, it's certainly written or put in place as a result of the war. They want to start instilling this in, the youth of America after the war, so they don't think about secession.
Right. Well, and it's just another one of those little building blocks that create the natural, you could say assumptions, but suppositions that people have about about how things are. When you realize that this is something that's been recently put in place and didn't exist, during periods in history where contention existed, and things were much more open, much more free until they were forced not to be. People, of course, it's no wonder people have such trouble understanding how the past actually was. And you constantly have a modern, political machine, fill in the blank of modern interests that really don't care about history or why it matters. I mean, that's a different argument, but and like I've said before, they just want it to go away, and so. They have no interest in any of this stuff. And so what they do is they try and inform the knowledge of the past based on the present, which is impossible to do logically. The past informs the present because the present is a product of the past, not the other way around. But yeah, so much causes us to project a different view of the past onto the past rather than what actually happened. The only way to understand the past is to study what came before and led into historical events, how they came about. And only through taking that through to today can you actually understand our situations today. Not backwards. It's not logical to do. And you will take away the wrong lessons if you do so. And in which case it's worthless.
Well, the masters are Trotsky and Goebbels. And today's Department of Education.
Department of Education that tries to
never educated a damn person.
Well, they never educate anything. It's so sickening when you really think about the cycle of money and how it's taken from us, the taxpayers, thrown into the Department of Education. They grow their bureaucracy, then they inject it back into the states and basically blackmail them to accepting a curriculum or whatever. And it could be a small town in any place or county or state. And now the state is corrupted too, which is perfect for them because once they accept that money, they've been officially blackmailed. They're done. Then they put in CRT and guess what? We're all paying for it. Thank you very much. So all of this corruption, we pointed out since the beginning, 1776, since war between the states, you see what happened to Jefferson Davis and even Robert E. Lee, and their attempts to be labeled as traitors and trial under treason or whatever, and it never came to be. And so, who is the real traitor? Who's committed the real treason here?
Well, if you look at the facts, the man who suspends part of the Constitution and instead of taking care of his country and its association amongst sovereign states, the one that goes in and tries to conquer a sovereign state. I mean, is that not treason to the Constitution?
I think you got a big old quote on that, don't you, Paul?
I don't know. Somewhere I might. It could be.
Or a blurb or something on it.
Yeah, I don't know, but you know, in general, it's like all of this union that was created out of the war between the states is evil. It's become more evil. It's not good. It is not clear and is not righteous. It is a corrupt setup, and it's a corrupt system.
It's not responsive to its citizens.
Right. And there's especially today, but you saw that breaking away back then.
Yeah.
The tyranny is destruction of the people of the sovereign states. That's what the southern states were fighting. But the Yankees won. And in order to make their destruction of the Constitution, destruction of the southern states, they have to call us traitors.
Well,
so they call us, to validate what they've done. In order to validate that, you have to
try to
point at
justify.
the enemy. Those are the bad guys. They committed the treason, but that's not the case.
Well, to try to justify their invasion and the cause for the war, rather than some lofty preserve the Union, now it's rebellion and treason and slavery and that's it,
Yeah. We can, it's almost like virtue. It is virtue signaling. It's virtue signaling today. We're BLM, we're Black Lives Matter, no, you're not. You're a fraud and you're using Marxist slogans. You're not really doing anything. You're an idiot.
Well, and it'd be one thing if all of the white supremacy and racism, and this will probably piss a lot of people off, but I spend a lot of time around lots of different types of people, and I don't see, there's probably something in white fragility about what I'm about to say, which I don't subscribe to. But
you better hold on to your junies.
I don't see the white supremacy. I don't see it. You'd think I'd see it, I hang out with a lot of guys that like to fly this flag. I still don't see it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it should, if it were such a big deal, right? If it was so influential in society, it should be plainly in evidence.
We would be,
and it's not.
I told somebody I told a reporter in the paper one time, because somebody was getting notes, people were getting flyers on their cars and in mailboxes about, join the Klan, this sort of stuff. And I said, this is all
complete bullshit.
This is all just a red herring. I said, I'm president of the local SCV camp. You think they would contact me first if this was true? Right. They'd be coming to the SCV and saying, hey, you're all on our side. Come on, man.
Yeah.
That's the last thing they want to do.
We didn't hear anything.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, not to mention that actually violates Article 2 of the SCV Constitution. That's right. But we won't get into that.
But it's just more of that convenient stuff that they've gone so far as to call parents objecting to having their children taught untruths as domestic terrorists.
Yeah.
Tell the big lie and tell it often enough, and people begin to believe it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a terrorist. I'm just trying to espouse in civilized discourse what the truth is, and disagreement and civil, discussion, I think, is totally okay.
Yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. Debate and deliberation and exchange of ideas. And you may not agree, but that's why we have a republic, supposedly. But that's not being done. You're being slowly, it's almost like a quiet genocide.
Well, and it's all kind of done.
Replaced.
A big driver here is that there's some supposed right for people not to be offended. All right. Now, nobody gives a crap about me being offended or you,
I'm always
but, so there's something I find pretty offensive going on every day. I choose to address that through civil discourse, of course, and I don't uh, it's not a call for violence or anything like that. But that's the other thing. In these discussions, people will be offended. You have to not be afraid of that. You're not going to be able to carry on. You're not going to be able to exchange ideas without the risk of people being offended.
Wonderful.
And even those who are, well, kind of alluding to what I was saying before, even those who are supposedly championing these people who are, so offended all the time, whoever they are, fill in the blank, they don't care about who they offend in the name of doing whatever. So
it's one speak.
It really is.
You can only speak the allowed words.
It's a completely
approved.
It is one of the three ways to argue, but it's always been one of the weakest to hold together is the whole emotional argument. When you're making these emotional arguments, it goes along with the whole emotional, argument kind of way of thinking. And it's just, it can't hold up in the long term. You can win the moment or something like that, but you're not gonna, for things that are by definition not logical, they're emotional, you're not going to get any type of agreement or be able to pick apart ideas and see where people might actually agree when they didn't think they did at all. You're not going to be able through emotional arguing to do that. All you're going to do is disturb a real civil discourse and ultimately not only not solve the problems that you might be claiming you're trying to solve, but you're going to make them worse.
Yeah.
Let me to get back onto treason and traitors and all that. Let me read a couple paragraphs written by former chaplain in the war, Reverend J. William Jones of University of Virginia. He was a friend of Jefferson Davis after the war, and quotes Davis in here, which I think gives us a little bit of an insight into their side of it, their feelings towards what was being broadcast about them. Jones says, "Let me add my earnest and hearty protest against calling our war the rebellion. It was not a rebellion, and we were not rebels or traitors. George Washington was a rebel because he fought against properly constituted and legal authority. And if he had failed, he probably would have been tried as a rebel and executed as a traitor. But Jefferson Davis was no rebel. When he led the great struggle to maintain proper authority to uphold law and constitution, and when the federal government held him as a prisoner, they never dared bring him to trial because they knew, under the advice of Chief Justice Chase, that the ablest lawyers at the North, and they could never convict him of treason under the Constitution and laws of the United States." I remember one day down at Beauvoir, several years before his death, the grand old chief of the Confederacy said to me, alluding to this question, "Rebellion indeed. How can a sovereign state rebel? You might as well say that Germany rebelled against France, or that France, who was overwhelmed in the conflict, rebelled against Germany, as to say that the sovereign states of the Confederacy rebelled against the North or the government. Oh, that they had dared give me the trial I so much coveted and for which I so earnestly begged, in order that I might have opportunities to vindicate my people and their cause before the world and at the bar of history. They knew I would have been triumphantly acquitted and our people purged of all taint of treason, and they never dared bring my case to trial."
That's a great
Jefferson
quote.
Davis.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a fantastic quote. And
you better not mention him though, because he's the originator of the whole lost cause idea.
Right.
Remember that?
Now,
Right.
the last paragraph here, Jones talks about something we just talked about. Who were the real traitors? Is it not time then for those people to cease talking about treason and rebellion and to stop their insults and calling us rebels? If there were any rebels in that great contest, they were north of the Potomac and the Ohio. The men who trampled underfoot the Constitution of our country and the liberties bequeathed us by our fathers.
Yep, exactly. You know, our when they say our fathers, our founding fathers, our great grandfathers, but their grandfathers who fought in the Revolutionary War, they were right, and their grandsons were right, who fought for the Confederacy. The South was right. That's what we believe. You know, these mealy-mouthed Republicans and even so-called conservatives today who worship Lincoln, they're wrong. They're really, really wrong. And either they're too ignorant or they're too scared, or I don't know what the hell is wrong with them.
I think they're
But
ignorant.
they're so-called conservatives are not conservatives.
Right.
And
they're
these
not-
and the Republican,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
I've heard one friend of ours associated with our camp said one time, if the Confederates were wrong, so were the founders. Period.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely right, because we are the ones who try to uphold and knew instinctively in our souls. We're I don't know what it is. Maybe we are different. I would hesitate to say that, but we know what evil is and what good is. We know what freedom is and what's not. We know what a central authority is and what's an independent thinking sovereign people is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so obvious to us.
Well,
So why would they call us treasonous? There's something more evil going on. So
Well,
who are the real traitors to liberty? We're liberty-loving people. You know, we're free people.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be. We're true to the Constitution. You know, that's what American Reckoning is all about, is trying to find out what the heck's going on here before it's too late, because this place is going down. You look around you. Even any of you, look, most of the people who watch this podcast are kind of like-minded to us, but I would challenge anybody who is not to listen and take and look around with you in an honest perspective. You know, put your device down. Even if you're a Gen Zer or whatever, you're a young person, you know, before this collapse happens.
and also let me add, you know, for anybody, you know, who wants to take you up on your challenge there, you know, some people might be liberals, and they might believe that salvation comes through the state, and that government is a benevolent organization for the betterment of humanity. In which case, when we start talking about, can't you see how obvious it is? They're like, yeah, it's totally obvious. It's totally great, is what they would say. But anybody that doesn't, anybody who is not a liberal, anybody who considers himself conservative, I would put forward to them that you cannot really be a conservative and espouse the Leo Straussian, Lincolnian view that of America and still believe in founding principles. You cannot be a Jeffersonian and a Hamiltonian at the same time.
You can't. They're diametrically opposed. I mean, it's not that they weren't passionate about their positions, but you have different people in this world. And I'm not saying, but when the food starts to run out, your economy collapses, you don't have any more freedom, all your money and your paycheck goes to the friggin' government. Well, you better stop and friggin' look before you lose it, because if you really want that, then you're on your way to communism. And the Marxists and all this language and crap is, you bought into it and it's taking you right over a cliff.
All socialism,
we don't believe that.
All socialism is dictatorship. Just because it's not a fascist dictator or somebody like that individual calling the shots, it's still a committee calling the shots. It's still central planning. As
Mao said, all power is held at the point of a gun.
Right.
So
doesn't matter if it's a committee or not.
Yeah. See what happens when you decide, I don't have that much money to pay your taxes. See what happens when you say that. You will be taken at the point of a gun.
Yeah. Well, if you have a business and they have something to liquidate, they'll take it.
Yes.
You know,
Well,
if you just got,
they'll take your property. They'll go. But if you become
and that's
so
done at the
insolvent,
point of a gun, because go say, no, you're not, you will be the one
yeah.
to suffer. The whole perceptions, modern perceptions, the people that are already ingrained in this whole central government system bureaucracy are those people that are living in that artificial world, that concrete jungle where they are dependent on it already. They are not the people that who were self-sustaining or self-responsible. You know, they're not.
They're not independent thinkers. They're not independent. You know, your average farmer out in the country, he's got to think independently all the time. He's got to make quick decisions about it because he's running his own business.
Well, he's also
and if you're in this concrete jungle, whatever, where the government pays for everything, you're not independently thinking anymore. You're
right. You don't get water.
You have freedom inside that government box. That's your freedom in that box, right?
In the box, right?
Out here, or people that are who are self-reliant or
in any
personal responsibility,
country, right?
They function with that government authority, but they also have learned to be personally responsible and have no need for that. They don't need to ask permission to do to live.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So it's two different mindsets.
It is. And you wonder why there's so much mental illness and everything. And look, we can go off on a tangent on a different topic when it comes to today. And I get it. But it's, if you're working and working for yourself, and I contend that, and a lot of us probably do, that you're mentally better off. You're making your own decisions. You live, you fail, you learn from your failures, you experience life, you know, all of that stuff. And it's hard to tell someone who's already in their phone and that's all their world and everything's taken care of and whatever. It's so I want to kind of leave because we should probably we can talk about treason and trade. There's so much stuff on all this, but
let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think it basically the whole talk of treason and traitors, I think, boils down to the central government or the powers that be justifying and putting themselves in the good light and justifying what they did to these sovereign states as justifiable.
Right.
You know, we're the good ones here. They were traitors. So, and that's where it all comes from. I mean, that's where it all began, that, you know, they're the bad ones, we're the good ones.
Right.
And even though nobody was tried and none of the leaders were convicted or tried of treason.
It's a false flag. It's a false narrative. It's the way to justify their actions, which were against the Constitution. And it's easy. It's like throwing around racism. It's like throwing around white supremacy. It's like throwing around treason. You're a traitor. You're a traitor. You know,
rhetorical language.
So friggin' easy for them to throw that kind of crap out. But you have to stop and think about it and read about it and realize you're actually wrong.
Yeah. What was anybody convicted of treason as a result of the war?
Zero.
Yeah. Zero.
Well,
that's what I thought. Just thought we could have that on the record there.
They nearly impeached Johnson too for his for his part in.
And he was a Lincoln guy.
Yeah. Well, the Republicans.
He was from East Tennessee, and sometimes East Tennessee goes a little weird on us. But
the radical Republicans wanted blood, and for him to do that, didn't give them their blood, so they went after him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that period we briefly discussed. Before the 1867, some really crazy stuff went on in the state, the until recently seceded states. At that time they were not states; they were military districts during Reconstruction. But at some point, we should get into what the Yankee governors, military governors, were saying. Story for another day.
That is a great. Let's do that in another podcast.
That could be part 2 of Treason, if you want.
Yep. Yeah, let's do that. So I want to leave you guys with one thing here, and this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing, but believe it or not, if this ever does happen, you heard it right here first on this podcast. But we have a name for this new future government that spins into, assuming that we can't rise up and, change this government legally and lawfully, or by what the Constitution called, a righteous cause to set things right, whatever. They didn't call it that, but you know what I mean. But we have a name for this new consolidated, centralized, unionized, one nation crap, that this new nation, right? And we're going to call it, because we have a government now without limitation of powers. But this is what we call it. We're going to call it the People's Central Union of America, or PCUA. And
PCUA.
And we even have a slogan. It's the People's Central Union of America, PCUA, where the individual freedom, rights, and liberties of the states and people are hereby rescinded. F an American reckoning. That's what it's all about. So thanks. That's your new country coming to a theater near you.
As soon as things get bad enough, they'll say, well, we're going to just take over and we'll help you all. You just have to give up your rights.
Right. It's for your own good.
All right.
Well,
thank you, boys.
Thanks. This is American Reckoning. Appreciate y'all joining. Remember, hit American Reckoning on YouTube. You can find us, or we're also on Rumble now. So just look for American Reckoning podcast. I think you can find it, and subscribe to our channel. So we'll see y'all. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Aaron. Bobby, we'll catch you next time. Y'all take care.
I have the rights, don't have a dream of a word. I have nothing for myself. I have nothing I would give to you.